1987. Pieces of land resting at the very edge of the map, quite literally. A place with no roads and barely any communication. And one brave swimmer, Lynn Cox. She crosses the icy waters of the Bering Strait, swimming from Little Diomede Island to Big Diomede. Just 2.5 miles apart, but separated by an entire day in time. On one side, the USA. On the other, the USSR. She steps ashore in a restricted Soviet border zone that only years earlier had been tightly sealed. And in that moment, those countries seem to be separated not by a Cold War, but simply by water. Yet, this is only one of many remote places on the map of the United States. There's a park larger than 9 New York cities, a place deeper than the Grand Canyon, a watery maze of 1,000 lakes, and a fortress of 16 million bricks in the middle of the ocean. These are the places where civilization seems to end, and the America that almost no one has ever seen begins. The most remote places in the U.S. Have you ever dreamed of escaping the hustle and bustle? To a place where your phone goes silent and all that's left to do is gaze at the stars? Then the Maze is just the place. It's located within Canyonlands National Park in the southeastern part of Utah, west of the Colorado River. And here's how you can get there. First, you should drive to the Hans Flat Ranger Station. It's about a 2.5-hour drive from Green River City. But keep in mind, this is the last outpost of civilization. From here, you'll have several more hours of driving to the true paradise for introverted thrill seekers, the Maze. Why the name? Because the network of canyons here really does form a confusing labyrinth. And there's absolutely no infrastructure. You'll have only what you bring with you. There's nowhere to buy anything within the Maze. No food, no water, no medicine, no fuel, not even cell service. Nothing. Just the oddly twisting canyon walls, the sun, and you. Speaking of roads, they're no joke either. Novice drivers are better off staying away from the Maze. If something happens to your vehicle, you'll have to get out on your own. Commercial evacuation from here starts at around $2,000, and your supplies might not last that long. Only 4-wheel drive vehicles are allowed into the canyons, and you must stick strictly to the roads marked on the map. But if you're an avid traveler and the canyons of the Maze no longer surprise you, then you're ready to visit the next place. The wild Owyhee Canyons stretch across the borders of 3 states: southeastern Oregon, southwestern Idaho, and northern Nevada. This is a vast desert plateau, carved by a deep network of gorges formed by the Owyhee, Bruneau, and Jarbidge rivers. Smooth cliffs, red-brown walls, and rare dirt roads that vanish into the stone and silence. In terms of scale, it's one of the largest untouched landscapes in the continental United States. Interestingly, Owyhee is an old spelling of the word Hawaii. In 1819, 3 Hawaiian trappers disappeared while exploring this region. The memory of their fate lives on in the name of the river and mountains. The stone architecture of the area is the result of a long volcanic history. The rocks here are made not only of basalt, but also of pale rhyolite, which erosion has sculpted into hoodoos and amphitheaters, especially striking in outcrops like Leslie Gulch. The canyon walls reach up to 1,000 feet in some places, and the landscape is truly breathtaking. The canyons twist into a labyrinth where the horizon constantly shifts. And although at first glance it may seem like there's only rock, life thrives here. The Owyhee region is home to at least 26 endemic plant species. From Packard's blazing star to Owyhee clover, pronghorns roam the slopes and plateaus, greater sage grouse soar above, and desert bighorn sheep make occasional appearances. In the cold tributaries, you might even spot red-banded trout. Nature here is magnificent, but as far as roads, cell service, and other comforts of civilization, they're practically non-existent. In bad weather, it's best not to venture into the canyons at all, unless you want to risk staying there for good. Drivers who plan to explore the area must come fully prepared. Still, there's one activity that thrives here and draws more and more visitors: rafting. However, given the twisting terrain and steep river depth changes, rafting is recommended only for experienced athletes. And by the way, you'll definitely need a boat to get around the next destination. This is the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, located at the junction of northeastern Minnesota, USA, and the province of Ontario, Canada. It's like a water labyrinth made up of more than 1,000 lakes and thousands of miles of interconnecting rivers. The network also includes 2 cascading waterfalls on the Pigeon River, Partridge Falls and High Falls. By the way, the latter is the tallest waterfall in Minnesota, standing at 120 feet. Naturally, one might wonder, how did a landscape with such an unusual mesh-like pattern come to exist? About 2.5 million years ago, a glacier moved across this area, carving deep channels into the rocky deposits. Then, around 15,000 years ago, the glacier began to retreat, leaving behind sand and clay that formed natural barriers between the bodies of water. The result is a maze of lakes connected by channels and rivers. Since ancient times, this area has served as a vital waterway for indigenous peoples, missionaries, prospectors, and fur traders. In the early 20th century, President Theodore Roosevelt declared it a national forest. Covering about 1.2 million acres, the area provides nesting grounds for rare bird species, including the bald eagle, the symbol of the United States. Despite the construction of roads and infrastructure around the park, the area remains remote and largely untouched. Thanks to strict protections, civilization won't be encroaching anytime soon. You can travel here for days, whether paddling a canoe or hiking on foot, without encountering another soul. The number of tourists is carefully regulated. From May through September, anyone wishing to canoe in the Boundary Waters must obtain a special permit. This system helps to preserve the area's unique wilderness atmosphere, a true place to connect with nature. In the next location, you can also find peace and tranquility. But here, you'll need to be extremely cautious. Dry Tortugas is a small archipelago of coral islands located west of Key West, Florida. It was discovered in 1513 by a famous explorer and conquistador, Juan Ponce de Leon. During his visit, he caught a large number of sea turtles, and perhaps as compensation, named the islands after them. So the word Tortugas makes perfect sense. But why dry? Well, there's absolutely no fresh water on the islands, none at all. Yet despite that, the local wildlife populations thrive. The archipelago is constantly changing, its shape, outline, and even the number of islands. Over the past 2 centuries, records have counted anywhere between 7 and 11 islands. That's because of constantly changing water levels. Some islands sink below the surface while others reappear. Hurricanes and storms also play their part. Middle Key, for example, regularly submerges and resurfaces almost on schedule due to the tidal cycles. There are only 2 ways to reach the park: by seaplane or by boat. On the second largest island, Garden Key, there are 8 primitive camping sites, so anyone planning to stay there must bring everything they'll need. But the effort is absolutely worth it. You won't get bored here. The abundance of wildlife is breathtaking. The coral islands are a paradise for divers and snorkelers, and the area teems with birds, including rare and endangered species. For some, the islands serve as a stopover point during long migrations between South America and the United States. Other species, like the sooty tern and brown noddy, specifically come here to nest. The islands are also famous for Fort Jefferson, the largest brick masonry structure in the Western Hemisphere. It contains more than 16 million bricks. Construction began in 1846, originally intended as a coastal defense fort, but it was never fully completed. Over time, politics and priorities changed, and the fort was frequently abandoned. Finally, it was officially incorporated into the National Park System in 1992. In short, there's plenty to admire here. But let's not forget, getting to Dry Tortugas isn't easy. Then again, it depends on what you mean by not easy. After all, some transportation does reach the islands. And yes, most forms of transportation are prohibited in this area. Why? Let's find out. The Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness is located in the north-central part of Idaho, near the Montana border. It's a place where nature remains in its pristine state, and the size of the area is impressive. It spans 2,366,700 acres. Originally, this land was inhabited by indigenous tribes long before Europeans arrived. Later came Western settlers, fur trappers, explorers, and in the second half of the 19th century, miners and prospectors. In the 20th century, the area became part of the Idaho Primitive Area and the Salmon Breaks Primitive Area. Then, in 1964, the Landmark Wilderness Act was passed, and thanks to it, the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness was officially designated as protected land in 1980. The wilderness was named after Frank Church, who served as a U.S. Senator from Idaho from 1957 to 1981. Church was a strong advocate for environmental protection and played a key role in passing both the Wilderness Act and, a few years later, in 1968, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. This region holds two notable records. First, it's one of the largest continuous wilderness areas in the United States. Second, it's unique because it spans 6 national forests and even includes a small section managed by the Bureau of Land Management. Naturally, this area draws tourists from all over. It's rare to experience nature untouched by civilization, where forests thrive and animals roam freely. Moreover, the Salmon River Canyon plunges to depths of about 7,000 feet, even deeper than the Grand Canyon. However, as mentioned earlier, exploring this region typically means traveling on foot. Its wilderness status strictly prohibits ground transportation. Motorboats are allowed only with restrictions, and only on the main channel of the Salmon River. For hikers, there are several established routes and trails, such as the Idaho Wilderness Trail or the Loon Creek to Horseshoe Lake route. But even when following designated paths, proper preparation is crucial. Encounters with wild animals are a real possibility. By the way, the chances of such an encounter are even higher in our next destination. This wilderness complex in northwestern Montana is named after Bob Marshall, a forester and one of the founders of the Wilderness Society. It's said to be one of the cleanest and most pristine mountainous regions in the country. The total area is 1.5 million acres, almost 8 times the size of New York City. The Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex encompasses several mountain ranges, rivers, and vast impenetrable forests. There are no proper roads or infrastructure in this area. You can travel through it, of course, on foot or even on horseback along local trails, but your encounters with wildlife might become too close or even fatal. That's because nearly the entire spectrum of Rocky Mountain fauna lives here. There's a good chance you'll come across a wolverine, lynx, moose, or even a cougar or wolf, species that have found refuge from extinction in this area. According to the U.S. Forest Service, this region is also home to one of the largest grizzly bear populations outside Alaska, so camping here carries a real risk of encounter. This is truly wild, rugged terrain. Not everyone can handle a trek here, but for those who do, the rewards are extraordinary. Pristine forests, the famous Chinese Wall, a massive limestone escarpment, and Pentagon Mountain, the highest peak in the Trilobite Range. 1.5 million acres of nearly untouched wilderness. And yet, those vast expanses pale in comparison to our next destination. Are you ready? 13.2 million acres. Imagine, the previous location covered about 8 New York cities. Now multiply that by 9. Welcome to Wrangell-St. Elias National Park, the largest national park in the United States and one of the coldest and harshest. It's located in south-central Alaska and is home to many of the region's natural bests. For instance, it has the largest Piedmont glacier in North America, the Malaspina Glacier, or Hubbard Glacier, the longest tidewater glacier in Alaska. And finally, Nabesna Glacier, the longest valley glacier in the world. In fact, over 60% of all glacier ice found in Alaska's national parks lies within Wrangell-St. Elias. But the park's uniqueness doesn't end there. It's a true land of ice and fire. At least, it once was. The Wrangell and St. Elias mountain ranges contain more than a dozen volcanoes, mostly dormant, many of them massive shield volcanoes. Only Mount Wrangell is considered active. and Mount St. Elias at 18,000 feet is the second highest peak in both the US and Canada. It's no surprise that this extraordinary region is part of the International Biosphere Reserve and is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Legally, the area is divided into two zones: the National Park, where hunting is prohibited, and the National Preserve, where hunting is allowed. The preserve is nearly half the size of the National Park. Getting here is difficult, but not impossible. You'll need to fly into Anchorage City in Alaska, then access the park via a highway. On the park's eastern coast, cruise ships occasionally pass as well. Inside the park, however, there are only two roads, used mostly by wilderness campers and thrill seekers. In summer, visitors can explore the park on mountain bikes, raft along glacial rivers, or, of course, climb. Since about half of Alaska's 70 tallest peaks are found right here. But despite all these records, Alaska isn't the only place in the US with glaciers. However, it's far more challenging to reach one of them. The North Cascades are part of the Greater Cascade Range, often referred to as the American Alps. They're located in the northern part of Washington state near the Canadian border, and authorities did attempt to develop the area. In the 19th century, there was logging activity here, and there was even plans to build a railroad. Starting in the 1920s, several dams were constructed to generate hydroelectric power. But the harsh climate, rugged terrain, and remoteness from major industrial centers ultimately made resource development unprofitable. Eventually, environmentalists took the region under their protection, and in 1968, it was officially designated as North Cascades National Park. The park is truly a kingdom of mountains and water. The North Cascades are among the highest peaks in the Pacific Northwest, most of them capped with permanent snow. The region also experiences frequent and heavy rainfall, and combined with consistently low temperatures, this has created the highest concentration of glaciers in the contiguous United States. Over 300 of them. So the north part of the name makes sense, but why Cascades? Well, the glaciers and rainfall feed countless rivers, lakes, and streams. As the rivers descend through the mountains, they form spectacular waterfalls, cascading down the slopes, giving the range its name. Beautiful? Absolutely. Yet, North Cascades National Park remains one of the least visited protected areas in the US, attracting only about 17,000 to 40,000 visitors per year. Why so few? There are several reasons. First and foremost, accessibility. The nearest major highway is US Route 20, but it doesn't go deep into the park. Most access roads are forest trails or gravel routes that become almost impassable or officially closed during winter. In other words, for several months each year, the park is almost unreachable by car. But let's say the road is open and everything looks fine. Then suddenly an avalanche strikes, especially on the western slopes, or a snowstorm hits. Tourists planning to visit often cancel their trips, while those already inside face real danger. Even if the lower roads remain passable, the mountain trails become treacherous or completely inaccessible except to the most skilled mountaineers. And even then, success isn't guaranteed. Unfortunately, statistics show that North Cascades National Park has one of the highest fatality rates among all US parks. Ideally, visitors should travel with a highly experienced guide, but as you can see, few people are willing to take that risk. In our next destination, it wouldn't hurt for tourists to have a guide, but if your group exceeds 15 people, you won't be allowed in at all. This is the Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness. The Absaroka Range lies in the south-central part of Montana and extends slightly into northern Wyoming. Yellowstone National Park is just to the south of Absaroka. The Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness encompasses two mountain ranges. To the west are the Absaroka Mountains, of volcanic origin, and to the east, the Beartooth Range, composed of granite. The name Absaroka comes from the self-designation of the Crow tribe, who once lived in the valley between the two ranges. True to its name, the jagged peaks of the Beartooth Range resemble bear teeth. The area is wild, uninhabited, and vast, covering 944,000 acres. It's part of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, one of the largest nearly intact natural environments on Earth, spanning more than 20 million acres of pristine wilderness. Interestingly, the Absaroka Range is densely forested, while the Beartooth Range on the opposite side of the valley consists mainly of rocky plateaus. It's also home to Granite Peak, Montana's highest point, reaching 12,799 feet. For hiking enthusiasts, the park offers over 700 miles of trails, all designed for exploration on foot. No vehicles of any kind are allowed, not even bicycles. Hang gliding is prohibited, and altering the landscape in any way, such as logging or mining, is strictly forbidden. Naturally, there are no modern roads or buildings here either. What remains is pure nature, camping, fishing, and hiking in small groups of no more than 15 people, as required by official regulations. Despite the park's size, you may spend your entire visit without seeing another soul. Few people are prepared for such solitude. However, the biggest challenge for visitors isn't within the park itself, but on the way to it. The main route is aptly named the Beartooth Highway, a serpentine road winding along the Montana-Wyoming border. Those sensitive to sharp altitude changes are advised to stay away. The highway crosses Beartooth Pass at nearly 11,000 feet, and very few drivers would risk having altitude sickness behind the wheel, triggered by steep elevation gains. Add to that the snowdrifts and storms that can strike even in summer, and you can see why this route is not for the faint of heart. It's no surprise that the Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness remains one of the least accessible and crowded destinations in the United States. Our next location is also remote and sparsely populated, though at least it has permanent residents. We're back in Alaska, this time at the northernmost point. Utqiagvik is the northernmost city in the United States. A few numbers for context. It's only about 1,300 miles from the North Pole, and just 9 miles away lies Point Barrow, or Navuk, the northernmost point in the country. According to official data, about 5,000 people live here, most of them Inuit. The city's current name, Utqiagvik, honors the return of the indigenous language and heritage of the area's original inhabitants, who gave the city its original name. From 1825 until 2016, it was known as Barrow, named after Sir John Barrow, a British Admiralty scholar and explorer. But following a local referendum, the city restored its traditional name. Due to permafrost, the roads here remain unpaved, and there are no overland routes connecting Utqiagvik to the rest of Alaska. Still, it serves as a vital transport hub for other Arctic coastal villages, such as Utqiagvik and Point Hope. There may be no roads, but there is an airport. Several Alaska Airlines jets fly year-round, carrying cargo and passengers to Utqiagvik. In summer, when the Arctic Ocean slightly loosens its icy grip, cargo barges can also reach Utqiagvik by sea. The city is informally divided into 3 sections: South Utqiagvik, the oldest part, Central Utqiagvik, the largest, and North Utqiagvik, the smallest and most isolated. The latter was once home to the U.S. Naval Arctic Research Laboratory, NARL, which now forms part of Elias College, the northernmost accredited college in the United States. The other districts have all the essentials: hotels, restaurants, a police station, post office, church, and city hall, everything you'd expect from a self-sufficient city. Despite its remoteness and extreme climate, Utqiagvik attracts a surprising number of visitors. Why travel so far north? To have the exotic experience. From mid-November to mid-January, the sun doesn't rise at all. It's the polar night. Then, for more than 80 days in summer, it doesn't set. The city hosts the International Midwinter Festival, Utqiagvik, and in mid-April celebrates Peragiakta, marking the start of spring and the whaling season. And of course, who wouldn't want to boast of visiting the northernmost city in the country? In short, Utqiagvik doesn't lack visitors, unlike our next destination, where even the locals are trying to escape. Adak Island, whose name translates as Father Island from Aleut, lies about 1,200 miles southwest of Anchorage, near the very end of the Aleutian Islands' tail. Today, the island is home to a small settlement bearing the same name, which happens to be both the westernmost city in the United States and the southernmost city in Alaska. Adak is the 25th largest island in the U.S., with an area of 274 square miles, roughly 5 times smaller than Long Island. Yet only about 170 people live there permanently today. It wasn't always this quiet, though. During World War II, Japanese forces managed to seize several Aleutian Islands from the U.S. The US was alarmed at the prospect of Japanese military bases so close to its territory. To preempt them, the US decided to act first by establishing its own base on the Aleutians. The chosen location was Adak Island. The plan worked. The Japanese were expelled and the islands returned under US control. The base remained active long after the war. Until the collapse of the Soviet Union, Adak hosted US Navy patrol aircraft monitoring Soviet ships and submarines. But by the early 1990s, the base's strategic importance had waned. In 1997, the US Navy officially decommissioned it. Today, all that remains of the base is a large airport, unusually big for such a remote location. Aside from the tiny town of Adak, there are no inhabited areas left. The abandoned barracks and military buildings of the former base, combined with the harsh subarctic climate, create a stark, almost depressing landscape. Life on the island mainly revolves around fishing and maintaining the docks and small harbors. As a result, by 2020, the population had dwindled from over 6,000 to just 170 residents. In 2023, the island's only school shut down. Planes fly to Adak just twice a week, weather permitting. All signs point to one thing. In the near future, Adak Island may become an uninhabited, hard-to-reach natural site. Not unlike our next destination. Another island, yes, but this one is deserted for a different reason. It's completely off-limits to visitors. Time to head somewhere warmer. Navassa Island has been officially uninhabited for many years. It covers about 2.1 square miles, and it's definitely not the kind of place Robinson Crusoe would have chosen. First, there's no fresh water source, something Christopher Columbus's crew already discovered back in 1504. Second, the island has another rather unpleasant feature, but more on that later. So the island was discovered, named Navassa from the Spanish Nava, meaning field or plain, and then promptly forgotten, for centuries in fact, until 1857 when it suddenly triggered nothing less than an international conflict. That year, the United States decided to claim the island. The reason? American sailors had found rich deposits of guano, seabird droppings used as valuable natural fertilizer. Under the Guano Islands Act, the U.S. could claim any uninhabited, unclaimed island containing such deposits. Navassa fit the criteria perfectly. It officially belonged to no country at the time. However, Haiti strongly objected. Navassa lies just 35 miles west of Haiti's southwestern peninsula, 103 miles south of the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and roughly a quarter of the way between mainland Haiti and Jamaica in the Jamaica Channel. Haiti also decided to assert territorial claims. Its arguments were based on different historical documents, including the 1697 Treaty of Ryswick and the Haitian Constitution. However, it turned out that Navassa wasn't mentioned in any of them. The U.S. never even treated it as an international dispute. It was considered a purely domestic matter. In 1890, the U.S. Supreme Court confirmed American jurisdiction over Navassa Island. Soon after, guano mining operations began, but the venture was doomed from the start. Hurricanes struck, a workers' revolt broke out, with fatalities, and production was eventually halted. The Spanish-American War in 1898 sealed its fate, forcing the complete evacuation of the island. The U.S. made several later attempts to use the territory it claimed in a dispute. A lighthouse was built, then decommissioned. During World War II, the island served as an observation outpost. Today, however, almost no one sets foot there. Since 1999, Navassa Island has been designated as the Navassa Island National Wildlife Refuge, part of the Caribbean Islands National Wildlife Complex. Thanks to it, the island is now a sanctuary for many rare and endemic species, such as the red-footed boobies, sooty terns, and reptiles like the Navassa anole. The island is surrounded by sheer limestone cliffs, making landfall difficult. To protect both visitors and wildlife, the refuge is closed to the public, and access to its territorial waters or land requires a permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Interestingly, our next location also requires a special permit to visit, and it happens to be the southernmost point of the unincorporated territories of the United States. Yes, the Palmyra Atoll is under U.S. administration, but it doesn't belong to any state. The island lies about 960 miles southwest of Hawaii. It was named after the ship Palmyra, which wrecked there in 1802. Before that, the island was completely uninhabited. Just 4.6 square miles of land, coconut palms, diverse wildlife, and a massive coral reef beneath the surface. Since its discovery, however, Palmyra's history has been anything but quiet. According to some legends, pirates buried treasure there, later sought unsuccessfully by treasure hunters. There was even a murder, with the victim's remains found in an iron chest at the bottom of the lagoon. By the late 19th century, both Hawaii and the United States contested ownership of the island. Part of Palmyra became private property, belonging to 2 Hawaiian citizens sent there by the order of the king at the time. Over the years, these lands were sold and passed down to heirs. Even after Palmyra was officially annexed by the United States in 1912, private property rights on parts of the island remained. When Hawaii joined the United States in 1959, Congress passed a resolution separating Palmyra from the new state, and that's how it became a federally incorporated territory. During World War II, Palmyra was included in the Palmyra Island Naval Defensive Sea Area. The U.S. military built a base there, though today almost nothing remains of it except the island's single airstrip. Then, in 2000, came a deal that changed the island's fate. Palmyra became the most expensive island ever sold at auction. The Nature Conservancy, TNC, bought it from the descendants of the original private owners for $30 million, roughly $54 million in today's value. Afterward, the waters surrounding the islands were declared a wildlife refuge, and later most of the land area was protected as well, except for a small portion still privately owned by the other descendants. When commercial fishing was banned within the refuge, the decision caused an uproar among fishing companies. But in 2025, a federal court in Honolulu upheld the ban, blocking attempts to relax it. The Nature Conservancy, TNC, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USFWS, took Palmyra under their joint care and began restoring the refuge. They eradicated the rats that had overrun the island since World War II and helped revive its natural tropical forest. Furthermore, Palmyra sits at the junction of 2 major ocean currents, one flowing from the north, the other from the south, which brings ocean debris from both directions. The beaches must be cleaned regularly, a task carried out by scientists and conservation workers who occasionally visit the atoll. There are still no permanent residents. And what about tourists? Technically, access to Palmyra isn't entirely forbidden, but there are a few conditions. To set foot on the islands, you need a permit from the USFWS or TNC. You can volunteer and sign a contract with one of these organizations. Researchers can apply for special authorization from the Fish and Wildlife Service to conduct scientific work. Or you might visit Palmyra if you receive an invitation to join a TNC-sponsored expedition. You could also arrive by private sailboat or motor yacht, but the voyage from Honolulu across the Pacific takes about 5 to 7 days. Even then, you can't stay longer than a week. Private vessels aren't allowed to remain moored for more than that. And if you're not alone, tough luck. No more than 2 boats are allowed to anchor at the atoll at the same time. What about planes? Unless you're working for the Wildlife Service, you can't fly to Palmyra. The island's single runway is now reserved exclusively for the FWS. Still, the Pacific Ocean at least makes Palmyra reachable year-round. By contrast, the next location is often inaccessible by both sea and air. We're talking about 2 islands, Big Diomede, which belongs to Russia, and Little Diomede, which belongs to the United States. These are tiny remnants of the ancient land bridge known as Beringia, which connected Eurasia and North America more than 10,000 years ago. The Diomede Islands have a truly unique location. They lie in the Bering Strait, at the junction of 2 seas, the Chukchi Sea to the north and the Bering Sea to the south. Although the distance between them is only about 2.5 miles, the international dateline, the boundary between time zones, runs right between the two. So when it's already tomorrow on Big Diomede, it's still yesterday on Little Diomede. Because of this, they're sometimes called Tomorrow Island and Yesterday Island. When Bering discovered the islands, Little Diomede already had a settlement, inhabited for about 3,000 years. There was a long-standing native Inuit village. Today, the settlement has around 77 residents who engage in bone carving and whaling. Interestingly, until the mid-20th century, residents freely traveled between the islands on ice or by boat. But after 1948, the border was closed. The USSR evacuated the inhabitants from Big Diomede. established a military base there, and any unauthorized crossings were deemed illegal. That's how a few daring and very risky escapes across the strait began to occur. Near the end of the Cold War, there were even some notable incidents, including long-distance swimmer Lynn Cox's symbolic swim in 1987. Since 1989, there's been an agreement allowing visa-free visits for certain indigenous residents of the Bering Strait region, but only with prior approval and through designated checkpoints. So there's no free crossing from island to island, and Big Diomede on the Russian side remains a closed border zone with no permanent residents. Little Diomede does have inhabitants, but limited infrastructure. No airplanes are flying in. There's no airport. Hardly any ships come either. Moreover, there are no roads on the island. Not pedestrian, not vehicle, not even proper trails except for a few abandoned paths in the cliffs. Within the village, locals move around on wooden walkways. But there's still a connection to the outside world. Where a plane can't land, a helicopter can. It arrives weekly, mostly carrying mail, weather permitting of course, and in the northern seas, the weather doesn't always cooperate. Moreover, once a year, usually in summer, a barge arrives bringing supplies, materials, and essentials. And that's about it. According to some travel guides, if a visitor manages to get there by private boat, there's a $50 fee to step ashore. Perhaps it's the settlement's modest way of replenishing its budget. It seems that the locals are unfazed by their remoteness, having adapted over centuries. Unfortunately, the inhabitants of our next remote destination weren't as lucky in adapting to their isolation. This is St. Matthew Island, located in the same Bering Sea. It's part of the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge, and it's considered one of the most remote corners. St. Matthew Island covers 137 square miles, making it the 44th largest island in the US, and today, it's completely uninhabited. The nature here is harsh and unforgiving. Access is blocked not only by remoteness and harsh conditions, but also by giant cliffs along the southern coast, over 1,000 feet high. The nearest settlement is at least a full day's boat trip away. Records show that until the late 19th century, the island teemed with polar bears. In fact, among whalers, it was known simply as Bear Island. However, soon the bears were extirpated by hunting. But even without predators, life on the island was still difficult. In 1916, a schooner ironically named the Great Bear was shipwrecked there. The survivors were rescued a couple of weeks later. By then, they were on the verge of despair, worn down by cold, damp air and dwindling supplies. Tensions ran so high that violence nearly broke out among them. Even such an isolated speck of land didn't escape World War II. At that time, almost every island served some strategic purpose. From 1944 to 1946, St. Matthew Island hosted a radio navigation station that helped military aircraft navigate over the Pacific. The station crew endured 26 feet deep snowdrifts, 10-day blizzards, and a sea frozen solid for 7 months of the year. The officials made an attempt to solve only the last problem. To provide food, the U.S. military brought in 29 reindeer in 1944. For a time, they thrived and multiplied rapidly there. By 1963, their population had reached 6,000. But by then, the humans had long left. The outpost was abandoned soon after the war. However, no one remained to manage the population. Overpopulation and harsh winters led to starvation and disease, and by 1980, the reindeer population had completely died out. Today, this remote island is home mainly to birds, as well as foxes and singing voles. Interestingly, those voles exist only on St. Matthew and nearby Hall Island. These populations have survived from the last ice age here. The foxes, meanwhile, reached the island on their own, crossing over sea ice from mainland Alaska. Any traces of human presence here are slowly being erased by nature itself.